Hi everyone, my name's Kristen and today I'm going to be sharing with you my TBR for the month of February. The first book on this list is Starless by Jacqueline Carey. Starless is a standalone fantasy novel that is a warrior training school setup. The main character Kai is training to become a warrior to protect his soul-bonded partner. I think that there is also some end of the world doom elements to this book as well. The tagline for the book was "Gods walk among us, but only a mortal can save the world," or something like that. Jacqueline Carey's fantasy series tend to be historical fantasy, and the main magical components are usually God related. And I think that is the case with this novel as well. I am definitely looking for more standalone fantasy novels. I have quite a few series in the works, or that I have started recently or I'm about to start in this month. So I'm really looking forward to Starless and seeing what it's about. I believe there is also some physical disability representation in this novel, and Jacqueline Carey is actually an author who writes about open sexuality quite a bit, and so if you're looking for something that has a little more representation, this might be worth a look. The second book on my TBR for February is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. I think this is also a standalone novel, or at least it currently exists as a standalone and works as such, but I think I read or heard that Brandon Sanderson is planning to continue this series further. So we'll see, but I think it works as a standalone currently. Warbreaker is going to be my sort of second series or second entry into the world of Brandon Sanderson. I started to read the Mistborn series last year, and just in January I read the second book in the Mistborn series, The Well of Ascension. I have heard less things about Warbreaker, but what I've heard is that it is really, really good. I think that the setup is sort of like two sisters, one of whom is like the perfect sister who has been always betrothed to marry the God King, and so her whole life she's been training to have this more political role, and so she's like perfect, poised, does all of her lessons, things like that, like really trained for this political marriage alliance, whereas her other sister is the more free-spirited, wild rule breaker. And I think something happens, like a mix-up or something, and maybe the wild one goes to marry the God King instead. I think that's the setup, and I've heard that there's a decent amount of humor in it. But I've liked the other works that I've read by Brandon Sanderson, and I like that it is currently a standalone novel, so that I'm not picking up another series before finishing the other Brandon Sanderson series I have on the go. The next book for February is going to be Ash Princess by Laura Sebastian. This is a young adult fantasy novel. I have heard that it is very angsty and very tropey. It is the first book in the Ash Princess trilogy. All three books are out, and so it's a completed series if that's what you're looking for. I definitely had a lot of adult fantasy on my January TBR and in my February TBR as well, and so I'm really looking to like mix in a decent amount of like light, fluffy, angsty YA fantasy to just lighten things up in between more of the serious adult fantasy and contemporary novels that I'm reading last month and this month. I believe the setup is that the main character, Theo, was a princess of the kingdom, and when she was really young, like 6, her family was murdered and the kingdom was overrun, and it's now being run by, I think, the Kaiser, and she is sort of held as a political, not even hostage, because I don't think she has family alive still, but she's held by the Kaiser, and I think fairly regularly abused and beaten, and used as an example sort of to keep her people in line, and even dubbed the embarrassing title Ash Princess. And something happens where she's sort of like asked to do something that goes a little bit too far, and this kind of sets her off into a path of joining the rebellion against the Kaiser. Okay, the fourth book that I'm going to be reading, or that's on my TBR for February, is The Girl in the Tower by Katherine Arden. This is the second book in the Winternight trilogy, the first of which is The Bear and the Nightingale. If you've heard anything about The Bear and the Nightingale, it is usually described as like very fairy tale-esque, very whimsical, atmospheric, and environmental, and it's usually put on a lot of like great books to read in the winter. I did read the first book, The Bear and the Nightingale, over the Christmas holidays. The original plan, I bought this book at some point in the fall or summer even, and I was waiting for months to read this book when I went home for Christmas to Canada, where I was expecting to have a snowy scape surrounding me. Fortunately, that did not work out. I was not able to go home to Canada for Christmas, and so I read The Bear and the Nightingale, I think in front of a dreary, rainy Denmark sky. But it definitely is a great wintry book, and it is really quiet, I would say. The Bear and the Nightingale is not super plot-based, but also not really character-driven. It reads like a traditional fairy tale would, where the story is almost being like told to you. It doesn't get super deep into the emotions and connection with the character, and it has quite a few, I don't want to say tangents, but it goes into developing the plot lines of some of the main characters, like siblings and her father. And I definitely felt at the time like that it wasn't related to that story. It was more setting things up for future books. And I think that that is the case. I think that the brother that was talked a lot about in the first book is going to play a bigger role in the second book. So I can't really say too much about the second book and what it's going to be about without spoiling what happened at the end of The Bear and the Nightingale. But I've heard that the second book in the series and the third book are much more plot-based than The Bear and the Nightingale was. The series is set in historical Russia, sort of before even it was Russia, when it was still called just Rus. The next book on my TBR for February is Malice by John Gwynne. This is the first book in the Faithful and Fallen saga. I believe the series is completed, and I think there are a total of 4 books. I have heard that it is sort of like all of the traditional fantasy tropes. There's a chosen one, there's a prophecy, there's a very distinct good and bad guy, or like good versus bad setup. The main character, I believe, it lives in a warrior-based culture. There are still giants in the world, but they have sort of beaten them off of this land or overrun the land anyway, and very humans versus giants, I think. And there is also a history within the world of there being like a good god and a bad god who had some sort of god world, or god war, I mean. And I think that the prophecy has to do with sort of a doom situation where the gods are going to have another war or something like that. While this does seem very sort of traditional standard fantasy tropes, I've heard that they're done very well in this series, and that it is a pretty well-liked series with really great action sequences. I don't know if I'm 100% in the mood for this. At least I'm not in the mood for it right now. Hopefully I'll be able to get to it by the end of the month, and I will be in the mood for it then. I have been it's been on hold on the library for quite some time, and I've actually sort of postponed it a couple times already, and I don't want to postpone it again. So no matter what, I'm going to get it from the library, and then if I'm not feeling it, I've got lots of other things that I can possibly read, and I'll put it down and have no problem kind of going on hold for it again at another time. Okay, next up is my classic for the month. Okay, last month I said that I was going to read a classic and a contemporary and one book on audio. I think it's too much non-fantasy for me to be honest, to do both a classic and a contemporary. I don't think that I'm going to be able to consistently do both of those things every month. So what I'll say is that I will do either a classic or a contemporary each month. So for the month of February, I'm going to be reading Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. And I have heard pretty good things. I've seen the movie and enjoyed it. I know that there's another movie coming out that's not the Murder on the Orient Express, but it's sort of like a different book in the, okay, I might not say this right. Hercule Poirot? I don't know. I was hoping that my partner would be here when I filmed this because he speaks French, and I wanted to get his opinion on how to pronounce Poirot. Anyway, so Murder on the Orient Express is a detective murder mystery novel based on the main detective Hercule Poirot, and I think the setup is exactly as it sounds. A variety of cast of characters are traveling on a train to go somewhere, and a murder occurs, and of course Hercule Poirot, a detective, happens to be on the train, and he has to solve the murder before they get to their destination. So I'm looking forward to reading that. I've actually heard that it is structurally written in a very distinct way, where I think what you're reading exclusively is the interviews that the detective is performing. And I've heard, unlike with the Sherlock Holmes books, that all of the pieces are there and that it is possible for you to figure it out. I, of course, have watched the movie, but I honestly don't remember who did it. So it'll be fun. Okay, the final book that I have on my February TBR is an audio book that I'm going to be listening. So this is my audio count for the month, and it is A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms by George R.R. Martin. This is a prequel novella for the series A Song of Ice and Fire. I have read A Song of Ice and Fire in the past, or at least up until A Dance with Dragons, the last book that was published in the series. We are, of course, waiting for 1 or 2 more novels. Oh well. I'm reading this book for my fantasy book club that I have here in Aarhus, and I've chosen to listen to the audio book, which is read by Harry Lloyd, who is the actor who played Viserys in the show Game of Thrones. I've heard he does an amazing job of the audio version of this book, so I'm actually really, really excited for it, and I'm excited to listen to it as an audiobook. I am familiar, obviously, with the series. I know this prequel takes place, I think, about 1,000 years before A Song of Ice and Fire. I don't remember, again, how long ago did A Dance with Dragons come out? I don't know. Even the show ended like 2 years ago now. So I hope that there's not like specific, like really, really specific references from the first series that I need to know. Either way, I think it'll be fun, and I'm looking forward to talking about it with my book club. The final book, I know that I said A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms was the final book, but I sort of lied. Essentially, I am not finished as of yet reading The Eye of the World, the first book in the Wheel of Time series that was on my January TBR. I know that I said I was hoping to read one of these books each month, and I just don't think that's going to happen. So I'm about 200 pages into a almost 800, I think it's like 780 something. Yeah, of an 800 page, almost 800 page book. I have read this book before, and I think that's almost why I've been reading it so slowly, was because I was kind of bored of the setup, like while they're still in the village and they're like learning about Rand's life before he, you know, discovers things and has to leave the village. So I was reading that part really, really slowly, and it sort of put me a little bit into a reading slump. So I think that I will leisurely continue to read this in January and throughout the month of February. Maybe I'll do one Wheel of Time book every other month. I think that's more realistic. We'll see. So that is everything. If I do finish the Eye of the World, I will probably start on to the next Wheel of Time book, The Great Hunt, which is the second book. Well, I'm losing my light. It appears that it is about to rain again, so I'll wrap it up for today's video. If any of the books I've mentioned you are interested in, let me know down below, or if you've read them and you have comments or suggestions on reading them, please let me know. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys, thanks.